There comes a moment in every relationship when silence changes its shape. It ceases to be a refuge and becomes a boundary. You feel that something has cooled, but you can't quite tell where it began. She's still there, with the same words, the same gestures, but there's an absence that can't be explained. It's as if the space between one sentence and the next has grown longer, heavier. Before a man pulls away, silence speaks first, but no one listens to it. He doesn't announce that he's disconnecting. He simply begins to withdraw in small doses. The body remains, but the soul begins to retreat. The touch loses intention. The gaze, once attentive, now looks anywhere but at her. And that's when the thermometer of the relationship begins to drop. Not because of a lack of love, but because of emotional saturation. A man doesn't distance himself suddenly. He retreats because the bond has stopped feeling light. Because the air between the two has become dense with expectations, demands, unspoken words. It's the weight of "it has to be this way" that pushes him deeper into himself. When the relational space turns into a field of tension, the masculine instinct seeks relief, not in someone else but in his own silence. The mistake for most women begins here. When they feel the cold, they try to reignite the fire by pressing harder. They ask, they demand, they interpret silence as indifference, without realizing that it's actually an unconscious plea for air. The man isn't running away from her. He's trying to reclaim the emotional freedom that got lost among the expectations of the relationship. There's a difference between distancing and giving up. The first is instinctive, a form of self-preservation. The second is collapse. When he goes silent, it's not because he stopped feeling, but because he needs to reorganize what he feels. It's the same process the body undergoes during a fever. It pulls energy from the surface and concentrates it inside, where the adjustment must occur. His silence is the thermometer of the relationship, and if you learn to listen to it, not with your ears but with awareness, you'll see that the cold isn't the end. It's merely a symptom that something needs to be realigned, because every man before leaving tries to find himself again, and that rediscovery almost always begins when he stops responding and starts breathing. There's something unsettling about the moment a man's eyes go empty. He still answers, still smiles, still touches, but he no longer sees. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but there's an inner displacement. The interest that once came from the heart now dissolves into silent indifference, and it's not lack of love, it's emotional exhaustion. The first real sign of detachment isn't silence, it's the loss of emotional curiosity. When a man stops noticing details, something has already broken. Before, he noticed her perfume, the tone of her voice, the nuances of her mood. Now everything goes unnoticed, as if the world around him had been drained of color. It's the brain trying to save emotional energy, protecting itself from a bond that now drains more than it nourishes. Neuroscience explains, when the limbic system, the emotional center, goes into overload, the brain activates self-preservation mode. It shuts down emotional focus to reduce internal discomfort. That's why a man, when emotionally overloaded, seems disconnected, distracted, distant. He's not choosing not to feel. He's trying to survive the excess of what he feels. And this is where the female misunderstanding deepens. The woman interprets his withdrawal as disinterest, and instead of giving space, tries to rebuild the bond through pressure. The questions multiply, the tests, the provocations. She tries to revive his presence through demand, without realizing that it only strengthens his flight. The male mind under emotional pressure triggers the defense instinct. He goes quiet. Retreating, for a man, is the emotional equivalent of breathing after drowning. This movement isn't rational, it's biological. Masculine energy, when it feels it has lost internal control, seeks to restore order by withdrawing. Detachment is the unconscious attempt to return to one's own center. It's the need to feel whole before connecting again. The man who disconnects doesn't do so from lack of love, but from lack of inner space. At this point, the emotional game reverses. She believes he's cold, when in truth, he's in collapse. He seems distant, when in truth, he's trying to reconnect with himself. And the more she pulls him back into conversation, the more he retreats. because the masculine can only hear when silence is respected. The empty gaze is a mirror. It doesn't show disinterest. It shows the weight of saturation. And when you see that gaze in a man, fixed, distant yet without anger, know that he's no longer trying to understand what he feels for her. He's trying to understand what he feels for himself. Jungian psychology said that every withdrawal is also a symbolic return to the self, to what was forgotten within the bond. The man who distances himself from a woman in this state is unconsciously trying to return to the point where he lost himself. He isn't withdrawing from her, but from the version of himself he became to please her. This is the most dangerous stage of a relationship, because emotional disconnection is rarely visible in time. It begins with small distractions. The phone more interesting than the conversation, the hug shorter, the gaze that no longer lingers. But inside him, the process runs deep. It's the ego reclaiming territory, the psyche demanding autonomy, the desire to feel once again like the protagonist of his own story. And when he reaches this point, nothing said will bring him back, because the problem isn't in communication, it's in overload. Reconnection only happens when he feels he can exist without needing to defend himself, when the atmosphere becomes light enough for him to lower his guard without losing his identity. Emotional disconnection is the silent stage before departure. It's not the end, it's the prelude to a choice. He's deciding whether there's still room to be himself within that relationship, and if there isn't, he doesn't argue. He simply disappears. When a man's eyes go empty, it's the clearest sign that he stopped fighting for something that once made sense. Not because he stopped loving, but because he can no longer bear the emotional cost of continuing to try. And when his system concludes that silence is safer than presence, that's when the bond begins to die. Yet paradoxically, it's also where healing begins, because distance forces consciousness to face what was ignored. And if she, the woman, can hold space for that silence without provoking, she may see that his withdrawal wasn't abandonment, but a desperate attempt to preserve what was left of himself. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't show in the body, but in the eyes. It's the fatigue of someone who gave too much and received silence in return, of someone who tried to adjust, understand, sustain, until realizing that nothing they did made any difference anymore. A man begins to disconnect not from lack of interest, but from lack of emotional return. He's still there, but on autopilot. At first, he believed love was enough. That being present, available, and faithful to promises would suffice. But over time, he realizes it all became effort, and constant effort without reciprocity kills desire. When the relationship stops being a space of exchange and becomes an arena of demands, the masculine retreats, because for a man, love must be a source of energy, not a drain of vitality. That's when the relationship's thermometer registers a quiet cold. He replies to messages, attends meetings, fulfills routines, but he's absent. Not because he stopped caring, but because the bond stopped nourishing his inner purpose. He no longer feels he's growing beside her. He feels he's repeating himself. A man needs to feel that his presence has impact. When that perception fades, he enters an energetic shutdown. The male mind, by nature, seeks meaning through action. When his gestures lose effect, when what he gives no longer sparks joy or gratitude, a psychological void sets in. The emotional system interprets that as uselessness, and nothing corrodes a man more than feeling irrelevant inside his own relationship. Disconnection begins there. In the moment, he stops seeing himself reflected in her eyes. It's an almost invisible process. He starts preferring silence to conversation, work to company, solitude to dialogue. He stops sharing what he feels, not out of resentment, but because he realizes his words no longer create impact. He becomes a spectator of a story he once wrote with passion, now watching from the outside the plot that lost its soul. And when a man reaches that state, something inside him has already given up. He no longer seeks to solve, he only seeks to avoid conflict. And in avoiding, he disconnects completely. He follows the motions, but no longer vibrates within them. He's a body present in a place where the soul no longer wants to dwell. This kind of fatigue is treacherous because it's silent. It doesn't explode, shout, or accuse. It simply withdraws. And what most women don't understand is that this withdrawal isn't pride, it's self-defense. When a man realizes that nothing he does is enough, he stops trying. And when he stops trying, it's because he's accepted that the relationship no longer recognizes him. Behavioral psychology calls this stage emotional investment fatigue, the point at which, after repeated unrewarded efforts, the individual reduces emotional engagement to protect against further frustration. A man doesn't think, "I'll give up." He simply stops investing energy where there is no return. And this is where energetic disconnection emerges. The desire that once drove the bond turns into routine. Presence stops being connection and becomes habit. He no longer feels invited into the relationship, only tolerated by it. And when that happens, his body might remain, but his mind is already planning an exit. The clearest symptom is when he stops fighting. When in an argument he agrees just to end it, not because he understands, but because he no longer sees purpose in continuing. The man who stops trying isn't calm, he's exhausted. And exhaustion is the coldest sign of emotional detachment. Behind this distance lies a symbolic truth. Every man needs to feel like the engine of the relationship. Not out of ego, but out of energetic structure. The masculine thrives when what he offers carries weight, impact, value. When that's ignored or taken for granted, the instinct to contribute shuts down. He stops acting because he feels unnecessary. At this point, any attempt at reconnection must go beyond words. He won't return through pleas for attention or promises of change, only through genuine presence, through lightness, through breaking the cycle of demand. A man must feel that the space is safe for imperfection and that his effort is seen. Without that, his inner flame fades slowly. And when the fire dies, what remains isn't the absence of love, but the weariness of having loved alone. It's the emptiness of someone who fought for two. And in that state, he doesn't leave. He simply disappears inside the relationship, becoming a shadow of the man he once was. But within that silence lies a seed of rebirth, because exhaustion forces him to look inward and ask, "At what point did I stop choosing myself?" And it's that question that finally pushes him to stop being a spectator and become the author again, whether by rebuilding the bond consciously or by leaving to find himself. Not every withdrawal is a loss. Sometimes it's the beginning of a quiet reorganization. The man who retreats isn't necessarily giving up. He's trying to breathe in a space that has become too dense. The cold she feels as rejection for him is the only way to find his center again. Because men don't process pain the same way women do. While she seeks to talk, he needs to be silent. While she seeks understanding together, he needs to understand alone. Male silence is an internal laboratory. It's there in the absence of noise that he confronts his distortions, his excess of giving, the concessions that drained his energy. Withdrawal is the body asking for pause, the soul asking for realignment. He steps back to feel what's truly his, because during the relationship, without realizing it, he dissolved himself trying to meet expectations, fulfill roles, prove presence. And when he realizes he no longer knows where I ends and we begins, the instinct is to go back inside. This retreat is often misinterpreted. The woman feels the void and, driven by attachment anxiety, tries to fill it by force. But the man, in that state, needs his space respected. Because silence isn't punishment, it's healing. It's the necessary interval between what was lived and what needs to be understood. And any attempt to break that process with questions or demands only amplifies the internal noise he's trying to calm. Emotional neuroscience shows that the male brain reacts to relational stress with cognitive withdrawal. When the limbic system is saturated, it reduces communication flow and increases introspection. It's the mind's natural mechanism to restore balance. That's why a man who goes silent isn't necessarily pulling away from someone. He's approaching himself. Within that withdrawal, he begins to notice nuances he once ignored. He realizes how much he gave to sustain something that no longer fed him. He realizes how much he erased himself, trying to be understood by someone who never listened. He realizes how much he sacrificed his instinct for direction out of fear of losing connection. And in that moment of clarity, he finally understands. Love should never cost freedom. A healthy relationship, for the awakened man, is one that allows him to remain whole. And withdrawal, paradoxically, is the path that leads him back to integrity. He stops seeking love as validation and starts recognizing it as a choice. He stops reacting to her absence and begins responding to his own need for presence. At this stage, the cold stops being rejection and becomes self-knowledge. There's something profoundly symbolic about this process. In archetypal psychology, the man's retreat represents the inner hero's journey, the moment he descends into his own shadows to reclaim the power he once gave away. The cold is the territory where he confronts his illusions, that he had to be understood at all times, that love meant unconditional acceptance, that being good was enough to be loved. In silence, he learns that being good is not the same as being whole. And that's when the relationship's thermometer changes its purpose. It no longer measures how much she desires him, but how firmly he can hold his own temperature. The mature man learns that true connection isn't about maintaining constant warmth, but enduring the cold without breaking. Because love isn't the flame that consumes, it's the fire that endures. When a man returns from this state of withdrawal, he comes back different, clearer, less reactive. He no longer seeks to prove what he feels, he simply lives what he understands. Absence taught him that presence isn't about quantity, but energetic quality. He no longer speaks to convince, but to express. He doesn't give to be accepted. He gives because he's whole. And at that point, the relationship, if it has maturity, can be reborn. Because cold, when understood, purifies. It separates what's essential from what's superficial. It shows what was attachment and what was love. And the man who crosses that cold without losing himself discovers that true connection isn't measured by how much you talk, but by how much silence you can hold together. The woman who understands this stops seeing withdrawal as a threat and begins to recognize it as part of the natural cycle of masculine energy. Because the masculine, to love truly again, must first find himself in the void. He must feel his own weight, his own rhythm, his own space. And when he returns whole, not out of need but by choice. The thermometer of the relationship then reveals its symbolic truth. Love is not constant warmth, but the capacity of two hearts to endure the winter without giving up on each other. The cold, when accepted, is not the end. It is the beginning again. It is the stage where a man finally feels again, not out of fear of losing, but out of the courage to stay.